of Batman's creations ultimately become the instruments of his demise? Maybe, yeah. Oh, don't act so surprised. Look who we're talking about. This is Batman number 141. So I can tell you this because DC spoiled it when they released the preview pages for this issue. In Batman 141, the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, Batman's erratic alternate personality, injects his consciousness into the robot body of Failsafe. I like that plot twist. It ties the Zur-En-Arrh stuff into the Failsafe stuff in a realistic sort of way. Well, realistic by comic book standards anyway. As I read Zur-En-Arrh/Failsafe's dialogue in this issue, I had to fight not to do it in the voice of James Spader, a la Avengers Age of Ultron. I'll tell you what, in an alternate life, James Spader might have made a good Batman. Also, the chase sequence and subsequent fight between Batman and Failsafe is really strong. So my hat's off to artist Jorge Jimenez and our colorist Tomio Mori. There's a line of dialogue in this issue that I hate. It's when it's referenced that Batman at one point sent Dick Grayson overseas to train with one of his mentors, Lucy Chesson. At what point did Dick Grayson go overseas to train? I guess it could have been during his time as Robin, but historically I think it's been generally accepted that he trained overseas with various people during the transition from Robin to Nightwing. And if it's being implied that Batman sent him to train with Lucy Chesson during the transition from Robin to Nightwing, that doesn't work. The change from Robin to Nightwing was about Dick Grayson becoming his own man. And if Batman sent him to train with Lucy Chesson, then that's not Dick Grayson becoming his own man. That's Dick Grayson continuing to be one of Batman's apprentices. It doesn't work. So in February, 3 weekly issues of Batman will be published, as the title presents its storyline, The Joker, Year 1. You know, based on our author Chip Zdarsky's track record with Batman thus far, I'm sure that this Joker Year 1 story will be good, but purely from a conceptual standpoint, it's kind of cringe, isn't it? I mean, those are two things that DC really loves to push down our throats. Overhyped Joker stories and Year 1 stories. Also, let's remember that DC is apparently insisting on the Jeff Johns, Jason Fabok story, 3 Jokers, being canon now. So I wonder how, if at all, that will color this Joker Year 1 story. One of Superman's worst enemies gets a planet to call his very own in Kneel Before Zod, number 1. So yeah, General Zod essentially gets what he's always wanted in this story, which is a planet to rule. I'm always intrigued by stories where the villain gets their heart's desire. It opens up the doors for really interesting character exploration. And I'm hoping that's what we get for General Zod here. Some really nice art and coloring in this issue by Dan McCade and David Barron. I think it's inevitable that Superman discovers this planet that Zod has, and based on some of the action that we get in this issue, I'm looking forward to when that day comes. You know, I think my favorite look for General Zod was the look that Terrence Stamp wore in the first 2 Superman feature films. It's not a minimalist design per se, but it's relatively minimal. As opposed to what we get in Kneel Before Zod, which feels kind of busy, kind of reminiscent maybe of a 1950s or 1960s B-movie spacesuit. I don't know, it almost feels like they're trying to evoke the same kind of costume that Michael Shannon wore in Man of Steel and The Flash. And my policy is that generally if the Snyderverse movies did something, you don't want to do it. Just my opinion. I think it's generally accepted amongst both fans and creators that General Zod kind of has this grandstanding, almost verbose way of talking. Fool, kneel before Zod, you will bow down to me, Jor-El, that sort of thing. But what's interesting and kind of funny to me is that in this issue we see that even when Zod is in private conversing amongst his family members, he still kind of has that grandstanding, verbose way of talking. And I just thought that must be hell on his relationship. Readers learn on the very first page of this issue that, much like Superman's full Kryptonian name is Kal-El, General Zod's full Kryptonian name is Drew Zod. And I thought that's kind of nice. His first name is Drew. But I will confess that, for me personally, that did conjure up images of General Zod being played by Drew Carey, which would be a casting choice for the ages. And you know what? There's a Superman movie coming out next year, so there's still time. Okay, this is a big one. It's Ultimate Spider-Man #1. Let's do a quick history lesson for context purposes. In the year 2000, Ultimate Spider-Man #1 served as a Big Bang issue for Marvel's Ultimate line of comic books. The idea behind the Ultimate line was to present modern, fresh interpretations on their classic heroes to bring in new readers. That original Ultimate Spider-Man comic wound up doing just that for Spidey and his world. I actually consider it to be one of the finest extended runs in the character's decades-long history, and it eventually led to the introduction of the Miles Morales character, which obviously still affects Marvel to this day. So the idea that Marvel would try to catch lightning in a bottle twice with the Ultimate Spider-Man concept might prompt you to roll your eyes, but then you open the issue and it's really good. Now, I had initially misunderstood the premise for this book, so let's make sure we get it right. This is not about an older Spider-Man. This is about an older version of Peter Parker, who is married to Mary Jane and has 2 children, becoming Spider-Man as a full-grown adult. That age difference, coupled with the fact that Peter does have a family to raise, opens up the door for a lot of different spins on the classic Spider-Man theme of power and responsibility. The classic Spider-Man status quo is also turned on its head in a number of places. This issue goes out of its way to play with the fact that certain characters who are normally dead are now alive, and vice versa. Our author here is Jonathan Hickman. And I'll be honest, Jonathan Hickman books tend to intimidate me. He's got really big, really heavy, sometimes really intellectual ideas. But this Ultimate Spider-Man story, thus far at least, has been very grounded, and I like that a lot. Yesterday I spent a lot of time thinking about top-tier talent and what exactly constitutes a top-tier talent. And you know, I still don't have a definitive answer for that, but whatever it is, Marco Cicchetto has it. And this issue should cast any doubt that anyone had about that into the dust. Peter Parker does indeed work at the Daily Bugle in this series, and as such there's a great journalism angle to this book that I'm really looking forward to seeing more of, especially as a former journalist myself. On one of the first pages of this issue, we see Peter Parker put his wedding ring on in the morning. And my question is, why was it off to begin with? Am I paranoid, or is something going on there? I think the one thing I don't like about this book is the way Peter gets his spider powers. They tie it into the events taking place in the larger Ultimate Universe, and I don't really like that. I think this issue should have been self-contained. This issue is $6, which normally I would call foul on, as I'm notoriously cheap, but in this case, I say go out and spend the $6. The issue is worth it. And who knows, maybe someday this will be as historically significant for Marvel as the original Ultimate Spider-Man was. Someone on the cover to Green Lantern #7 is going to die. Gee, I wonder who it's gonna be. This cover, while delightfully drawn by Edwin Gallman, is fairly stupid. Allow me to explain why. So on this cover, you have Hal Jordan, you have Sinestro, and you have Kilowog. Main hero, main villain, supporting character. More people are probably familiar with Batman's world, so let's put that in a comparative context. That's like having a choice between Batman, the Joker, and Commissioner Gordon. You're not 100% positive who's gonna die, but you have a pretty good idea based on the importance of each character. But in the case of Green Lantern number 7, the speculative side of things doesn't even matter. Because at the end of Green Lantern number 6, they told you who's gonna die. So this cover is essentially utterly pointless if you're already reading the book. The upside to this issue, though, is that we get to see all of Earth's Green Lanterns come together for like a meeting, colored by Romulo Fajardo Jr. and drawn by, I'm gonna butcher his name, I'm so sorry, Amanke Noelpan? I'm sorry, bud. Okay, look. Nightwing number 110 is a tie-in with the Titans Beast World comic book that's going on right now. As you might be able to ascertain by the cover, it involves Robin turning into a cat person. The interior's fine, it's fine. What I don't like, and what I can't seem to get past for some reason, is this cover, which, while delightfully drawn by Bruno Redondo, is a takeoff of the meme where I think one of the Real Housewives is yelling at a cat. I don't know, it's very popular, whatever. Maybe I'm just a grumpy old fanboy who doesn't really understand the appeal of memes. But is this funny? I mean, is this what passes for humor in comics now? This has happened at least one other time in a Tom Taylor comic. It was in Superman, Son of Kal-El number 15 back in 2022. They did a takeoff of the meme where Batman slaps Robin. They had Robin slapping a villain. It wasn't any funnier then than it is here, but at least there it wasn't on the cover. This feels lame to me. And kind of sad, like we're trying to score cool points with internet trolls. And by the way, I've been a big fan and supporter of the Tom Taylor Nightwing run. I think it's one of the best runs in the character's history. But between this and the 3-issue Nightwing as a Pirate story that we just got finished with, it feels like we're in a creative lull. And I hope we can escape it soon. Once again, a hero from the past returns to protect the future in Avengers Twilight number 1. So this story is about an aged Captain America who returns to action to inspire and protect a world that has more or less lost its way. We've seen the old superhero comes back story done numerous times at a high level over the past few decades. We've had Old Man Batman, we've had Old Man Superman, we've had Old Man Wolverine, etc. What we have here with Avengers Twilight is basically an Old Man Captain America story. And what I came into this issue looking for was an answer to the question of how is this story different from all those other Hero Comes Back stories? What does this story bring to the table that those didn't? The answer, I think, lies in how this story portrays certain American freedoms being assaulted, and how certain truths are being twisted to suit a fascistic agenda. I'm not completely sold on this book yet, but I'm intrigued and curious enough to keep going. Regardless, I'll definitely come back for issue 2 to see what Daniel Acuna turns in on the art and colors. What this guy turned in here is masterful. And of course, an Alex Ross cover is an Alex Ross cover. I mean, it's pure beauty. It's almost like, what else can you say at this point?
I think I'm starting to understand what it's like to be an older person that's disenfranchised with what the younger people are doing. Case in point, I was on Threads this morning, and I came across this post by this innocent cosplayer chick who asked the question, which is the better movie, the original Star Wars film or Rogue One? And I had to physically restrain myself from going off on this kid. Don't even ask me about Rogue One. Like, people get mad at me when I talk about that movie and just how I hated it. It's Daredevil versus She-Hulk in... Oh my god! Did she break his cane? I mean, I know he's Daredevil, but he's blind! You bitch! It's Daredevil number 5, and yeah, She-Hulk's not feeling quite like herself here. And evidently neither am I. Have I ever cussed during one of these before? Maybe I'll allow myself one once every couple of months. That was oddly cathartic. I'm not an artist, nor am I an art expert. But I am someone who's been buying comic books on a weekly basis for more than 20 years now. With that in mind, I think there's a delicate balance to be maintained when you're drawing big, muscular, female heroes, including and perhaps especially She-Hulk. You want her to look large and built and powerful, but you also want her to be feminine and, I guess, sexy. But you don't want to go too far in the competition bodybuilder direction, nor do you want to go too far in the direction of smutty, I'll say, web model. So that's what I mean by the delicate balance. Yeah, that balance is off in this issue, in my opinion. I think we went too far in not only the bodybuilder direction, but also the web model direction. And that's a shame, because I actually think the art in this issue, outside of that, is pretty good, but yeah, not She-Hulk's best outing. Mary Jane Watson finally decides to become her own damn superhero in Jackpot number 1. Yeah, Mary Jane now has a superpowered gauntlet that grants her various abilities. Which is a good thing, because I hear superpowered gauntlets are all the rage at Marvel these days. The name Jackpot is derived from the first line Mary Jane ever spoke in a comic book. And you know, in hindsight, it's funny to me that it took so long for Mary Jane to become a superhero. I mean, she's been abducted and harassed by so many criminals and supervillains and flat-out demons over the years. After like the third time, I would have just said, you know, give me a mask. What we have here is a nice little compact story that ties into the Gang War storyline that Marvel's currently doing, and also serves as an appetizer for the Jackpot and Black Cat series, which begins this March. Our cover by Pablo Villalobos is really strong. It kind of reminds me a little bit of an Adam Hughes cover. And ironically enough, the cover artist for the upcoming first issue of Jackpot and Black Cat, Adam Hughes. Small world. It's also a strong outing for our primary penciler here, Joey Vasquez, who I think is really good at drawing Mary Jane herself, namely in the face and in the eyes. I don't know if it's just me, but it reminds me of how Mary Jane's original artist, John Romita Sr., drew her. Paul is in this story. He is, of course, Mary Jane's boyfriend and her man in the chair, so to speak. Paul is kind of at a permanent disadvantage. He's likable enough in a vacuum, but people are always going to want to see Mary Jane together with Peter Parker, Spider-Man. So the situation with Paul just kind of is what it is. An old enemy returns to kill our hero in Green Arrow number 8. And apparently he succeeds. Yeah, Oliver Queen appears to be dead when we open this issue. But don't panic, that hasn't stopped him historically. The villain who returns for this issue is Onomatopoeia, a killer character who makes comic book / cartoon sound effects. He's actually a leftover from Kevin Smith's run on Green Arrow from the early 2000s. a run he did with our artist for this issue, Phil Hester. This is a pretty strong issue overall, especially when it comes to Phil Hester's pencils. You know how sometimes you get a character and an artist who just seem like they're made for each other? I feel like Phil Hester has that dynamic with Green Arrow. I enjoy his work on other projects and other characters, but there's just something about Phil Hester and Green Arrow. Maybe part of it is just because I'm fond of that Kevin Smith, Phil Hester, Green Arrow run. It was one of the first books that really prompted me to dive in to Green Arrow's world and take a hard look at the character. You want to know how old this trade is? We have remnants on the back here of a UPC sticker from a Borders Books and Music store. There's an echo from the past. You know, I was going to make a comment here about how the onomatopoeia character would probably never translate to television or film just because of the comic book sound effect gimmick. And yet apparently it already has. It looks like the character, or at least a version of the character, was in an episode of Superman and Lois. I haven't been really good about keeping up with Superman and Lois, but I feel like I need to see that episode just to see how they executed that. I mean, how does a serial killer keep his aura when he has to make comic book / cartoon sound effects? I mean, there's a reason that when Jeffrey Dahmer killed people, he didn't go, "Auga!" At least I presume he didn't. I wasn't there. Oddly enough, you know who I wish onomatopoeia would have taken out, or at least kind of wounded a little bit? Like in the 2011-2012 time frame? Kevin Smith. Because then he wouldn't have made the show Comic Book Men. You know, considering how much I love talking about comic books, and writing about comic books, and reading comic books, you'd think I wouldn't have cringed so hard at that show. But I did. Let's talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 147, and as long as we're on the subject, the future of TMNT comic books at IDW Publishing. This issue is a little bit better than the ones that immediately preceded it, but I maintain that this book is missing something. And it has been missing something since the Armageddon game storyline from last year. I'm not knocking the art is fine. It's just that from a writing standpoint, it feels like we're in a holding pattern until we get to issue 150 in a few months. You know, for the first time in this book's 10-plus year history, it feels stale. And it's felt stale for about a year now. And by the way, I feel like I can say that because I've been with this book since it first launched in 2011. I've been with them for the whole ride. But yeah, if there was ever a time for a creative shakeup of some kind, this is it. As fate would have it, that's exactly what we've got coming up this summer, as the IDW Publishing TMNT series will relaunch with author Jason Aaron at the helm. Not only that, but for the first 4 months of Aaron's run, we'll have a revolving door of A-list artists. We'll have Joelle Jones, we'll have Raphael Albuquerque, we'll have Cliff Chiang, and we will have Chris Burnham. And then Raphael Albuquerque will take over the series from there on out. It occurs to me that this is probably the biggest assembly of quote-unquote A-list, top-tier talent to come together on behalf of the Ninja Turtles, certainly in many years, if not ever. And it's going to coincide with the 40th anniversary of the first TMNT comic book. So that's definitely cool to see that kind of enthusiasm for the Turtles. At the same time, though, I won't lie, there is a little bit of wariness there on my part, because these TMNT comic books from IDW have largely been pulling from the same pool of independent creators since they began in 2011. So a departure from that is kind of like getting a new boss or supervisor at work. You know they're going to do things differently, and there's going to be an administration change. You're just not sure exactly what those changes are going to entail or what they're going to be, so you're a little nervous. I will say, too, that I wish the series wasn't relaunching with a new number 1. I guess that's just a personal thing with me, but I feel like because they're sticking with the same continuity that the book has established over the years, issue 151 works just as well as a new number 1. I know that's not really how the comic book industry works or how people work, but that's just my feeling. So let's call me cautiously optimistic about this new era of TMNT comic books. Jason Aaron and these creators have all proven that they can operate at a high level, but there's no guarantees until we see what they put on the page. I'll definitely be reading.